Hello, welcome to the channel. Franco here. And finally, we have the actual Google Tech Lead. Not the ex-Google Tech Lead, but the real deal Google Tech Lead, William.
Hi.
Yes. And the reason is he applied for last year, he applied for Facebook and he got an offer. He applied for Google and he got an offer. And he applied for Amazon and also he got an offer. So definitely you are doing something right there, man. And we will appreciate it, and you can share the secret with us.
Yeah, for sure. So, just going right into it, I feel like definitely for my secret was that I was overall just very ambitious. Just going into the hiring season was being ambitious, trying to get into big tech companies in general. And on top of that, being dedicated. And what I mean by being dedicated is that getting to these big tech companies takes a lot of practice because the coding interviews in general are just very brutal. You have to handle a lot of subjects. And on top of that, these big tech companies won't hire people that don't get optimal solutions in these coding interviews. So overall, being ambitious and dedicated were my secret for landing these tech offers. It was in my junior year when I realized that if I practiced enough and I just practice coding and practice interviewing, that I was able to land these tech offers. So definitely in my junior year, I realized that I could be able to get into these tech companies if I worked hard enough and if I was consistent.
Do you think GPA is important?
For these big tech companies, I read online that GPA isn't that important and that people get in with 2.5 GPAs. However, I read online again that 3.0 and plus is highly recommended.
Do you have any internships before applying for these companies?
Yes, so I had two internships before uh, applying for these companies. One internship at State Farm and one at AT&T, both in Texas.
Do you think that helped you to stand out from
Yes.
the other applicants? Okay.
Internships are probably the best thing on your resume. It shows that you're able to work with others because you had an internship. And on top of that, it shows that you've already had experience developing. So having an internship will put you far ahead of the other people that don't have internships. Experience is really important.
I see. So from Facebook, Google, and Amazon, which one has the most difficult interviewing process?
So for me, my loop at Google, interview loop at Google, was really, really difficult compared to Amazon, which I thought was very simple, and Facebook, which was also very hard. So Google was just insanely tough because it covered a lot of topics. On top of that, my problems were really hard.
All right. So how do you prepare for Google?
So for me, preparing for Google also meant preparing for Facebook and Amazon because their interview systems are extremely similar. So for me, there were three big factors that helped me land these offers. One of them was LeetCode.com, which is a coding website that you can do various problems. And they have, I think at this point, they have around 1,000 problems. So there's a great variety of problems that you can do. And on top of that, sometimes you can get problems from LeetCode and you're on site, and which is really fortunate. So it's really good practice, and you get really lucky if your interview pulls a question from the website. On top of that, I used the book Elements of Programming Interviews in Java. I used it in Java because that was my interview language. And for me, I really enjoyed that book because the solutions were very well detailed. They talk about how to go from brute force to optimal. And on top of that, you get a lot of problems. So being able to have a lot of problems with detailed solutions was great, very helpful. And one last thing is important that I don't think a lot of people talk about is mock interviews. So just doing problems on LeetCode.com and doing problems for elements of programming interviews, in my opinion, is not enough. You need to do mock interviews. So just throughout the whole hiring season, from around September to March, I will try to do mock interviews twice a week with my friend G. And over time, we were kind of slow in the beginning. It was kind of hard for me personally to talk and explain my solutions to G. But as practice went on, it became very natural to me. And that transitioned into the actual interview environment where I also felt very natural.
So like, in average, you said like how many hours? You said how many hours?
Okay, so for how many hours I spent, so I went very hard on LeetCode and Elements of Programming interview and mock interviews starting around August and September, right after vacation. And for me, I would try to, on the weekdays, I would either do 3 to 5 days on the weekdays, and I would practice around 2 to 3 hours. And on the weekends, I would practice from 2 to 4 hours. And just throughout the whole hiring season, I was really consistent. Like at minimum, I would practice 3 days a week, and the weekends, I would always practice. So for me, if I had any social things on the weekends, I would try to do and practice earlier, but I always got my practice in, and that greatly helped me for the interview process. I obviously have to work on projects at school and just homework in general. So just throughout the whole hiring season, there were a few weeks where I did feel like I was burning out because I would have to study for midterms and finals on top of practicing. But for me, I didn't fully burn out because I paced myself in my practices. So what I mean by pace myself is that I didn't do LeetCode every day. And if I didn't feel like doing LeetCode that day, I just wouldn't, because I would just do LeetCode another few days. So having breaks from LeetCode and just practicing in general helped me out a lot.
I see. So finally, how was the interview process in Google? Like, what was the first step? How do you apply?
Okay, so for me, I didn't have any referrals going in for any of the companies that I applied for. So Google, I feel like was very straightforward. I applied on the website, and a few weeks later, I got something called a coding snapshot. And essentially it's a coding interview test with 2 problems. And for me, I didn't feel like the problems weren't too bad. I was able to solve both problems optimally, and then I moved on to the phone interview. So for me, I got the email to request a phone interview in around September, and at that point, I didn't feel like I wasn't good at LeetCode at all. I felt.
So how you measure how good you were?
So at that point, I was already interviewing for companies, and I hadn't landed any offers. And just in general, from what I read, going into Google, interview process was that Google is extremely tough. So my thought process was, okay, I'm doing these coding interviews for other companies, and I'm not landing offers for them. So there's a very high chance I can't get Google. So I pushed back the phone screen until around November. And at that point, I felt like I was decent enough at LeetCode. I still wasn't extremely good as I was later on in the hiring season, but I was able to pass the phone screen. Phone screen wasn't too tough at all. It was 2 problems, and I was able to solve both optimally. And after the phone screen, Google basically flies you on site, and I did my on-site interview in January. On-site interview for me consisted of 4 interviews. They were all coding interviews, and just the whole on-site loop was extremely tough. I got a lot of hard problems, and looking up the problems later, they were tagged as hard on various websites like LeetCode. And overall, it was a very tough day just doing data structures and algorithms, coding interviews every day. But thanks to my practice over the last few months, I was able to land the offer.
So, do you ever get stuck in any of those questions? And if so, how do you manage that? Like in order to not get nervous and finally solve it?
So definitely I was not perfect during the Google onsite. And for me, whenever I got stuck, I made sure to not just get stuck and just stop talking. For me, that would be really bad. So usually whenever I get stuck, I talk out loud about various approaches that might potentially work. Like for instance, if I ran into a dynamic programming problem, I would talk about the brute force, but then upgrading the brute force to memorization is still really tough to me. So what I would do is I would talk about various approaches to memorization, like, okay, do I need a 1-dimensional array or do I need a 2-dimensional array? And I would just think about what information I would need to cache. So just talking about my thought process, whenever I was stuck, I still had things to go on. And whenever I said something that was correct in solving the problem, interviewers would like hint at that part, like, could you explain that part of the solution more? And they would nudge me to the correct solution. Of course, you don't want to get too many hints, but you don't have to be perfect to land these offers. You just have to do very good.
So pretty much, do you agree that they care more about how you solve the problem than if you actually can solve it, or both is important for Google in that case?
I feel
Like
like
other
for both is extremely important. They do care about your thought process. That is very important. But since they have so many candidates, and at this point, LeetCode is a free website to use, and you have all these books like Cracking the Coding Interview and Elements of Programming Interview, getting the optimal solution is extremely important to getting the offer. So you would need both in this case. Just interviewing in general is really tough.
And one thing to mention here is that we are not coming for like a big important university, right? But I
Yes.
think that is a big misconception sometimes, because they think, oh, only like people from Stanford or like from big universities can get to this job. But that is not the case, right? As long as you like practice and put the time into it, like anybody can do it. Do you believe everybody can do it?
Yes, I 100% feel that if you dedicate enough time, you have very strong fundamentals in data structure and algorithms, you could come from any college into Google, Facebook, Amazon. So these companies, since they're so big, they hire from all schools. And like you were saying, that we go to school and it's nowhere near UT, University of Washington, Stanford level. And yet people from our school were able to get into these big tech companies. So it really takes a lot of dedication and practice. But if you really want to get into these big tech companies, you definitely have a shot.
Finally, why did you choose Google instead of Facebook or Amazon?
So for me, what I read online is that Amazon work-life balance could be really tough. So for me, I didn't really want to deal with that with a job just straight out of college. I feel like I would burn out really easily. From what I read online, Facebook is an amazing place to work at. Food is really good, great work environment, and I went on site, so they have a really good campus. And the same things could be said for Google. Google is also a really good place to work. However, for me, what made me decide was that Google's work-life balance is a little bit better in the sense that it's not as stressful. And for me, since I'm moving to an entire new city, I felt like the adjustment could be a little bit tough. So having a good work-life balance would allow me to be able to just adjust to the Bay Area a lot easier. And on top of that, if I don't like the work culture at Google, there's always trying to go again for Facebook.
So I think that's pretty much it. And thank you so much for giving us these great advices. So if you have any questions, please leave it in the comments. Yeah, right.
All right. I'll see everyone later. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you so much.